Welcome everybody to this webinar. I am Monica Ghidinelli, the chair of the Good CME Practice Group, that is a member organization for European CME provider. I'm also a project manager for the EU Foundation. With me today, I have two other members of the Good CME Practice Group, Celeste Kolanko from Liberum IME and Sophie Wilson from International Medical Press. So the topic of today is about transparency in CME and CPD. But first of all, we would like to describe and define what transparency is, since this is one of the core principles of the Good CME Practice Group. So when we talk about transparency, what we mean is that all the relevant financial information should be disclosed to the learner, so that the learner understand fully how the content has been developed and will be presented to them. This includes the terms of the financial support, the relevant disclosures of faculty, and the organization involved in the development and in the delivery of the content. So now that we know and how this transparency is defined, I would like to go and ask one of our panelists why you think that this is important. So I would like to ask first, Sophie, why do you think that transparency is important in our as a medical provider?
Thank you, Monica. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Before I launch into an answer to that question, Monica, I just want to totally transparently disclose that I work for International Medical Press, who are an independent provider of education, including accredited CME. That's my disclosure. So why do I think transparency is important? I think it's really important that learners can make an informed decision about the education that they're about to embark on. They need to be able to decide whether they really want to participate in that the education that's on offer in an informed way. So they need to be able to understand how, as you said, how was the education developed? Who developed it? Who's funding it? Why is there a need for it? A clinical need? An educational need, or is it really just a marketing need? So all of these things need to be available to the learner up front, so that they can decide with their eyes open whether they want to actually do this education, whether it's relevant to them, relevant to their clinic, and their educational needs. That's my view in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Celeste, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure, thank you. And like Sophie, and again, in the spirit of transparency and disclosure, I am the owner and managing director of Liberum IME. We receive grants from pharmaceutical companies to create our education. But I also would like to disclose that I am a steering group member of the Good CME Practice Group, and I'm also immediate past president of GAME, the Global Alliance for Medical Education. So yes, I would agree with what Sophie had to say. I think transparency is extremely important because we are adults. We are talking to professionals within our education is for medical education professionals, be them doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals. And they have both the right and the responsibility to assess how the education was created. And clear transparency is the first step in allowing people to make the decision for themselves. How is this education and why is this education being delivered to me? So I think, it is one of our core principles, obviously, as part of the Good CME Practice Group, but I think it's really vital to ensure that we are transparent and make sure that we're very upfront that with what our potential conflicts could be or our potential biases.
Yeah, thank you. And to add on that, I would say that, of course, is one of the core principles of our group, but actually is one of the requirements also for accreditation rules. So they require that you disclose a certain type of information to the participants. So for sure is our core understanding and mission. However, it's also a requirement. I would like to go back to you because Celeste, I know that we had the discussion before is of course the financial relationship that has to be disclosed, but sometimes we talk about biases or the difference between bias and perspective of different faculty that we have. So can you elaborate or comment on that?
Sure. I think that this is a really important point. And to your point, Monica, it is our duty when we do accredited education to report any financial disclosures, which could potentially lead us to any sort of bias. But, the conversation around bias has come up quite recently. I attended a presentation by Terry Celeste from the Royal College in Canada recently, discussing bias, and really made me think a lot further that our biases often are much more than just financial. And I think, again, while it is a requirement to talk about the financial potential conflicts, personally, I would like to see us do more disclosure with other things besides financial. So, for example, if I work for a government organization, there's going to be some sort of a bias that I have there. If I work for a medical society, I have specific biases there. If I'm a patient or a caregiver, in many cases, I have certain biases and perspective. And he challenges to think, is it a bias or is it a perspective? And I think that it's really important that we think about these. And from a transparency perspective, while it's very important for us to ensure that our financial conflicts or our financial disclosures are in place, it's also really important, I believe, that we should be moving towards disclosing more around that. Hence why today I disclosed not only my financial relationships, but other industries, other areas that I am exposed to, that I would that I could form. They certainly form my perspective, and they could offer potential for bias at some point in time.
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much. Now that we know, why transparency is important, let's go a little bit of what do you do and what do you need to do to be transparent? So what do you need to be transparent about? So Sophie, can you tackle this question?
Yes, thank you. I think Celeste touched on it. Transparency goes beyond finance, the financial aspects. I think, up front, we need to disclose a financial supporter. That probably is our number one obligation, because that's where there's the greatest risk of bias or perception of bias. So I think up front we need to declare, where does our funding, is a program funded? But it's not just about how it's funded, it's what is the role, or hopefully isn't the role of the funder. So I think it's key to stress that the funder has provided a grant, but personally, I think it's important to also reiterate what role the supporter has had. So, for example, we will generally say that the supporter has given us this grant, and they've had no input to faculty selection, no input to the program. It's really important to do that and go beyond just the financial side. But then beyond the supporter, who else is involved? We need to ask who else is involved in our program. We have faculty. faculty will have financial disclosures. They might be on an ad board. They might be on a speaker bureau. They might be on a speaker bureau for 6 different companies. In a sense, that's a good thing to know, because that shows that they're actually working in the field, but not necessarily for one or other, with one or other of the companies. So that sort of information is really important. But also, you know, there are course teachers. What qualifies them to be teachers? Because that can bring in bias if they're good or bad teachers. You know, being an expert in the field, in a clinical field, doesn't mean you're necessarily a good teacher. So it's important to look at explain why faculty was selected, what expertise they were selected for. Are they qualified to run the course? So that's the sort of information that we should be collecting and disclosing, so that our learners can see that this faculty is the right person for this course. And it allows them to make that choice. Some of the things that faculty, non-financial things that we need to be thinking about is, are they an investigator? You know, our learners will want to know if they're an investigator on a trial that is run by the supporter. That should ring alarm bells. Now, it doesn't necessarily prevent that faculty from being on the board, but we need to mitigate that. But we're not talking about mitigation of risk. It's just an example of the sorts of things we need to be thinking about. Patients. Celeste talked about patients. They're also part of our faculty. We need to look at why. What do we need to declare from their perspective? And then there's the third thing, which is the provider. You know, we're the providers. What are our potential conflicts of interest? We need to be transparent about that, to show that we're qualified and we have the expertise to run this program. So I guess and we're independent. You know, that's what we need to declare transparently. Monica, do you want me to now go into some examples for different activities, or would Celeste like to do that?
Let's say, I mean, if you, Celeste, have a comment, otherwise we can, because the point is that when we start, right, what do you have? I think that we exactly have to think how, I mean, when you start to put together a program, how do you ensure transparency, and which are the steps that you go through?
Yeah, and
later on we will talk about how we disclose and where we disclose this information to the participants. But first,
I just wanted to add to Sophie a little bit there too. You know, she's done a great job at, you know, explaining all the different reasons why you would want to be transparent. And I think she touched on something about, you know, within our own organizations. So yes, I mean, while we're not faculty directly, we do directly work with faculty. So it's important for us to disclose those types of items as well. And, you know, and what is the nature of your business in general? So, you know, both in Sophie's case and in my case, our organizations do strictly independent medical education. We don't touch any type of commercial funded types of education. And I think that that's very important to make that clear as well, so that the learners know, you know, how are we putting this information together, and you know, and where is this coming from? So I agree with everything that Sophie said, you know, but just wanted to clarify that too, that I think that it's important for us as providers to, you know, be very, very transparent about what types of business that we are doing.
So now can you, I mean, exactly. So that is the key point, that we need to, I mean, we need to ensure that the education that is provided to the learner is develop based on the needs and not based on the needs of the patient, not on the needs of the company subsidizing for that education. So that is always a clear point that we have to keep in mind, and we always put at the center of all the education that we develop. But so how, I mean, really, how do you ensure the transparency when you initiate? So when you have to put a program together, which are the steps that you go through? Celeste?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think we start originally when we are looking at our faculty and vetting them for all the things that Sophie said, you know, what have they done in the past, where their teaching credentials, what are they, you know, where may they have financial interests, where may they have other types of interests, and we look at that. You know, we do accredit with a variety of accreditation bodies. We often will accredit through the American accreditation body, and they have very strict regulations as to a disclosure form that the accreditors require that we report, and everybody who's involved in the content, not just the faculty. So anybody on my staff who might be working on that program, from program managers to writers, have to complete a disclosure form and note that any financial disclosures that they've had for the past 2 years are disclosed there, and that's kept for records for auditing purposes later on. And then that material obviously has to be shared, whether it is a live event, whether it is an online event, and now even as we're starting to do more things with social media and types of things, making sure that there is access to who is funding, you know, right off the bat, who is funding, how it's funded, as Sophie said, you know, via, in our case, an educational grant, so that people know, you know, where the funding is coming from, transparency of any other parties that might be involved. So if we work with a society or any other organization, that has to be shared as well. And then each individual faculty and speaker that has to be disclosed as part of their bio as to any types of financial disclosures that they have. So that's kind of the process that we go through. Sophie, similar for you? Do you take any additional steps?
I think we follow the same process. You know, obviously it starts, in fact, even before the faculty selection, it starts with the needs assessment, so that we select the right faculty for that need, and not for somebody else's need who is perhaps not quite as independent.
Yes, exactly. I mean, faculty selection is a key point in the whole process. And I have to say that for our organization, that is a global organization, it's also very important to have different perspective, as we said before, because there are different cultural differences and so on and so forth. So we also have a variety from different backgrounds, from different countries. So then we have, let's say, a much stronger education at the end. But so, and also what I wanted to point out is that, of course, based on the size of the event, do you use a different system to collect the disclosures and to keep the records? Because I can imagine that for a big conference, you have thousands, I mean, not thousands, but many faculty and people involved in developing the content, while you have an online educational 1 hour piece of education that is a little bit different.
Yeah, I think, you know, there are definitely resources and software. I think a lot more people have gone to automating that. I know that we work with certain organizations that we basically send a link out to our faculty, and they do that, and it's automatically collated, you know, that type of thing. So technology has become a big help.
Yes,
in their area.
For us too, we have an automated system because we 7,000 faculty and over will be difficult to collect manually all the paperwork. That's a little bit tricky.
I think it's important. I think you're absolutely right that you know, use tools so that you can concentrate on what's important and the mitigation, for example. But I think it's really important to remember, and that your faculty and everybody doing a disclosure doesn't make this into a tick box activity. It's really important that you have to be transparent about the activity that you're actually looking at now. You know, your disclosures for one activity will be different to the other, maybe different to others. So it's really important, I believe, that the disclosure and then the declaration of it, of the data, is not a tick box activity. It's and we'll come to that in a minute about symposia, unless you want me to go straight there.
Well, I was going to say, Sophie, and I think that's a good, you make a really good point, because I don't know about you, but occasionally we will have faculty that, you know, we've done something with them in the past, and you want to know why they have to fill out a new disclosure form. And, you know, you're absolutely right. What might be appropriate, what might be important for one task may not be as important for another. But I did want to say, to your point about a tick box, I think, you know, of course, AI and artificial intelligence is a big you know, is a big buzzword right now, even though it's really been around for quite a long period of time. And this is an area that I think it could be extremely helpful to streamline, is utilizing it to pick up potential red flags earlier, so that it doesn't just become a tick box. It alerts us to areas so that we can go through any kind of mitigation processes. So especially, Monica, to your point, you know, 7,000 faculty is much larger than, you know, where we may deal with anywhere from like 3 to 10 at the most in any one instance. So I think that there is, you know, I think we will be seeing changes in how we manage this going along in the future.
So now this brings to the point, right, how we disclose to the participants and where. And as you, Sophie, mentioned, you want to give an example for a symposia. Maybe then later we can give 8 different examples. So please.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Monica. I think the important thing is to remember that the point of being transparent in disclosing this information, that the information behind how you put together the program, whether it's financial or faculty or content, the point of being transparent is that the learner, when they go to whatever the start page or the symposium is, they need to be able to, at any point, see that information and say, this is for me, or this is not for me. And that to me is one of the key points of being transparent. You give them that choice. It's an informed choice to go into the education. So for a symposium, for example, you should be disclosing as much of this sort of background information as you can right at the start, when you're promoting the activity, when you're inviting people to come and join the activity, when you're getting them to register for the activity. And then if it's a live symposium, your opening slides should be the learning objectives, but then it should be, how was this activity put together? What are the potential conflicts of interest? And those are the slides. How many of us have heard, oh, the provider asked me to put this up, let's skip that one, let's go to the first real slide. We need to educate our speakers to, actually, this is a really key slide for our learners, because you shouldn't be skipping it, because that learner in that auditorium should be able to say, I hadn't realized it was supported by so-and-so, or I hadn't realized that faculty did this or that. They should be able to get up and walk out if you declare things transparently, or they get reassurance. But it's really important that all this information is declared up front. So for a symposium, you do it in the promotional materials, but you also do it right at the start of the symposium. What might you do on an e-learning portal? On an e-learning portal, if your supporters are all the same for the whole portal, then you probably need a tab which is really clear that when people go to the home page, they then want to go to the activity, they should be able to see a tab that says supporter or something along those lines, so that before they go to the activity, if they want, they can click on supporter and find out. They can also click on the about, which will tell them about how you develop programs, who you are, who the organization is behind the portal. So again,
just to clarify, because when you say that, what it has to be clear is that it has to be free from industry logo, right?
Yes.
It has to be all plain text, because that is the requirement.
Yes. So what I was going to say is, well, I'll come back to that in 1 minute. So that's a portal, and with an e-learning activity, and I know Celeste, you mentioned the ACCME earlier. In the US with the ACCME, we have all this front matter, and people keep saying, why do I need all this front matter? Well, the front matter is all of this information collated so that when the learner goes into the activity, they're making a positive choice. Now, over the years, some of the accreditors, some faculty, people have said, why are you promoting the supporter by putting their name in every single thing? It's not promotion. This is about transparency. And that talks to your point, Monica, is you don't put the logo up there. We're not promoting the supporter with their logo. We are simply disclosing who is funding it, who's developing the content, who's going to be speaking. And you need to do that in language that is not advertising speak. It's a simple disclosure so that the learner can go into the activity informed.
Perfect. Thanks.
And I would agree. And I know there's been discussions, where does that recognition of the financial supporter go? And personally, I think that it needs to be as upfront as possible for Sophie's point that she's made, because otherwise, if I have to dig for that to find that information, I don't feel like it's being arm's length. I feel like it's something that I'm trying to hide. As a learner, I want to see right up front, this is supported by XYZ organization, company, and then I can make that decision as to, look at the rest of who's speaking, or who are the content suppliers, and then I can make that informed decision. And I think that our learners are getting much more savvy about this. I attended a symposium at a major congress last year, and it came up, somebody in the audience in the Q&A stood up and said, why did you flick past your disclosure slide so fast? I couldn't see any of your disclosures. This was in a large auditorium of over 200 people. So I think our learners now really want to see, they're getting much more savvy to this, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they can really know right up front, transparency, let a little sunshine in. It really helps to clear the air, and so that there's not this, what's happening and what's, who's hiding behind what.
I mean, in the EU Foundation, actually, what we do is that for every program, so if it's printed or online, there is always a link to the full disclosure of all the faculty. Of course, when it is within the presentation, there is a time limit. They have 10 minutes, and they want to go straight to the content. So of course, if there is no declaration, so no conflicts, they run through. But even if there is something, of course, they go very, very fast, because they want to go to the content directly.
they've actually measured this, and literally leaving a slide up for 10 seconds is enough time for people to read a disclosure. So it's only 10 seconds. And I understand where you're saying, but I know sometimes they want to get on in 1 second or 2 seconds. But again, technology, you can have it so that the slide won't advance for 10 seconds, so that it has to stay up there.
Okay, so we are running out of time. So I would like to thank you all. And we touch on important topics, on an important topic, and we hope to see you soon for the next webinar. So thank you, Celeste and Sophie, and to all the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.